Hello and welcome to Hot Topic Election Special. I'm Hugh Riches. This time I'm in the beautiful city of Lincoln and in the wonderful county assembly rooms here. Lincoln is the oldest constituency in the House of Commons. There's been a Member of Parliament for Lincoln since the Commons were first assembled exactly 750 years ago this year. I'm joined by two of the candidates. Others were invited but weren't available, but I'm very glad to say that Ross Pepper for the Liberal Democrats is here and Karl McCartney, the sitting Member of Parliament for the Conservatives as well. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming along. Karl, can I start with you? 750 years there's been a Member of Parliament for Lincoln. What have you done for the city?
I've done the best that I can do as the Member of Parliament for the past 5 years. I was lucky enough to be elected in 2010, and one of the things that I knew even when I was the candidate before being elected as the Member of Parliament was that the transport infrastructure of Lincoln needed to be improved, and that's something that I've concentrated on in the past 5 years. So we're now seeing that come to fruition. We've got the level crossing footbridges being built both over the High Street level crossing and also at the Brayford Wharf East, and of course the Eastern Bypass, which doesn't quite go back 750 years, but depending on who you talk to, it was first mentioned either 1916 or 1922, so nearly 100 years in getting that to fruition.
We've got, in terms of transport infrastructure in this place, we do have quite a few roads going through or past your city that go back a couple of thousand years. We've got some form. Ross, Karl's mentioned infrastructure. He was going to take all the credit for that, of course, but it's a Liberal Conservative government, coalition government. I suppose the Liberals can take credit for it as well?
It is. Obviously, we are in coalition and the coalition do work together, despite what people may say. It has worked well over the past 5 years, and we have implemented things that have benefited across people across the city, and I think that's great news for the people of Lincoln.
You're not going to sit here and just agree with each other for the whole of the programme, are you, since you're coalition partners? Ross, you have been the junior partner in the coalition up to now in the House of Commons. What would you do differently from what the coalition has done? How have the Conservatives held you back?
Well, I think the biggest thing is fairness. The Liberal Democrats want to put fairness at the heart of government, and I think we have been the heart of this government. If you look at certain policies that we have actually managed to stop in the coalition, such as employers being able to fire employees at will, that is a complete disaster. I certainly wouldn't want that to be imposed on the residents of Lincoln at all. So I think with the Liberal Democrats in government, we have introduced heart and some fairness that the Tories unfortunately don't bring.
Karl, Tories are an unfair party? Is that what you stand for?
That's far from the truth, I think, and Ross has been a little ingenuous there, or perhaps a lot ingenuous, I think. We have to free business up. Businesses and small businesses, especially, are what have made the country the great place that it is to do business, and they're the people who have provided 1.8 million extra jobs since the 2010 general election, and it's only with the Conservatives at the helm that we've managed to do that. Now, yes, I agree that we've been in a coalition, but actually I think the Lib Dems have held us back on various different issues, and that's something that they shouldn't be waving a flag about and taking credit for. The good thing that the Conservatives have done is make sure, and yes, we needed to have a solid coalition in place, was to make sure that after 13 years of a Labour government that had brought this country to its knees, that actually, we needed to get ourselves on a sound economic footing. And I'll give the Lib Dems credit for that, because I think we all knew that needed to take place in 2010.
We'll talk about economics a little later, and what you will no doubt refer to as the long-term economic plan. But I just want to talk about the student paying for an education as a university student. Nick Clegg famously had to apologise that he couldn't come through with his promises because his Conservative partners wouldn't let him. You have a massive student population, 2 universities in this constituency. How are you, Karl, how are you going to court students if you're charging them so much money?
Well, I think we have to realise it was the Labour Party that brought in the charges, and obviously, we've moved on from there. But universities, it's no longer the privilege of the few. It used to be when I was lucky enough to go to university, 5% of the population went to university. That's now over 35% of the population and pushing towards 40%. That's got to be paid for somehow. And universities have to know that they're going to be funded into the future. So that's something I think that the Conservatives, along with the Liberal Democrats, have made sure that we have a university education system that is well funded into the future. And that's something that we're very, very proud to have achieved. But one of the things I do realise is obviously, yes, we have 2 universities. I obviously was instrumental in helping Bishop Grosseteste move from being a teacher training college to a full university. I'm very pleased about that. And we do have nearly 15,000 students in Lincoln.
Ross, you perhaps your leaders and your party might be a little more cautious about making promises in the future. What is the proposition now? If you were to be in government, you would just do your best to reduce tuition fees.
I think the one thing that did come out of that is obviously we realised that in a coalition government we can't necessarily always get what we want. Being the junior partner and only having 57 MPs, we're not going to be able to input the influence that we would be able to if we were a larger party in the coalition. But in terms of the student fees, I think we have a fairer system. You don't start paying back tuition fees until you earn a higher amount than under the old system. And also, it is a lot lower rate of payment in terms of per month. So if you are looking at getting on the property ladder, starting a family, you're not saddled with repayments that are really high that you were under the Labour Party system. But I mean, I was a student at Lincoln University, and it was one thing that I really enjoyed my time at Lincoln University. Well, so I would like to make sure that Lincoln University
don't enjoy your time at university, then you're doing it wrong, aren't you? I wanted to just ask, I mean, education is such an important issue in this constituency because so many people are here because they're being educated. What's the point in having 40% of people going to university? If you get a qualification that simply identifies you and distinguishes you as about the same as 4 in 10 other people, what on earth is the point in having a degree? It's no great value, no great credit, no great distinction.
I'll answer that one. I think it is a great distinction to have said you've gone to university, and certainly with the university courses that are available now to young people, and whether that's with the new engineering school, the first new engineering school in 20 years at Lincoln University, or the other courses that both universities offer here in Lincoln. People who go through that as an undergraduate and then graduate are then equipped for the world of work better than they would have been if they hadn't gone through that system. But I think the educational map of Lincoln is pretty phenomenal. We have a university technical college as well. We have a thriving Lincoln College, and also we have a plethora of schools that are, the youngsters, if there are young people and their parents, will see that Lincoln has great opportunities for young people in education in Lincoln. One of the things I set up as well was a careers academy down at the City Academy on Skellingthorpe Road, and that's to bring businesses into schools, to show young people who are 15, 16 the use and why they should go to sixth form, why they should study further. And that's obviously a conservative plank of our educational policy, is to ensure that people do carry on in education and university isn't the right route for everybody, but that's one of the reasons why we aim for 400,000 apprenticeships that would be proper apprenticeships, not of 3 or 6 months, but actually year-long, if not longer apprenticeships. And we've actually surpassed that and are hitting 2 million since we were elected in 2010.
Ross, Lincolnshire is one of the grammar school counties, and that's always a controversial idea, that too is a sort of an elitism. Fewer people go to grammar schools than go to university. What's the Liberal Democrat policy on grammar schools?
I personally don't agree with grammar schools. I think it is, as you said, elitist, and making a distinction when someone is 11 years old as to which school they're going to go to is completely unfair. I don't think that should be a system that's in place.
Well, I'm going to disagree with Ross completely on that, because actually why take the Labour view that you bring everybody down to the same level? Surely a grammar school takes some of those people who...
No, that's not... Carl, forgive me, just let the poor man finish his point.
I personally completely disagree with Carl on this matter. I went to a school, a normal school and a secondary school, and it's about the range of people you meet. If you just go into one type of school where everyone's the same, I think you're missing out.
You go to a type of school where everyone's clever.
Yeah. I think you need to mix with a wide, broad people.
And I think were you a parent, would you wish your children to go to a school where there's a good representative number of stupid people?
No, I think it's about bringing everyone to this. You have to bring everyone up. You can't just have this elitist system and that get the best schools, the best teaching, the best equipment. You need that in all schools. And that's what we need, not the grammar schools. Bring all the schools up to grammar school levels. You don't need them then.
Carl?
Well, I think one of the first things I realised when I first arrived in Lincoln, 11 years ago now, was that there's a remarkable number of young people who leave Lincoln to go to school every day. And that's because, like any parent, their parents want their youngsters, their children, to get the best education possible. And those people were leaving to go to various different grammar schools that are based around Lincoln, because obviously Lincoln being Labour controlled, got rid of its 4 grammar schools back in
Lincoln City.
Lincoln City, that is. And so I think that there is a good place for grammar schools to be, to offer educational chances for young people, and I don't think it's elitist. One of the other policies that the Conservative Party have brought to the fore is the National Citizen Service, which is allowing young people from whichever background, from whichever school they go to mix and to get on and to learn outside of a curriculum various different things, and that voluntary work helps them and others in the environment in which they live.
You mentioned citizenship. Your two parties, one of the distinctions between them that is clear is your attitudes to Europe. Liberal Democrats are much more Europhile, enthusiastic about Europe than the Conservatives are. How do you make the argument that Europe is a good thing for the country when so many people seem to be tempted by UKIP?
Well, there's so many myths spread about Europe. That's one of the issues. Europe brings a lot of investment, a lot of jobs to this country. But the EU isn't perfect. The EU does need significant reform. It needs to be more democratic. But the only way you can do that is by playing a central role. You can't sit on the bylines and say, if we don't get what we want, we're going to leave. You need to actually sit in the driver's seat and take control of the situation to get those reforms to improve.
Ross, I'll have to stop you there. We're going to have to go to a break. And don't worry, Carl, you get to go in a moment. Please join us after this break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm in the beautiful city of Lincoln with two of the candidates for that seat. Ross Pepper for the Liberal Democrats, Carl McCartney for the Conservatives, who was Member of Parliament in the last Parliament here. Carl, we were just talking about Europe. Your point of view in the Conservative Party is completely unpredictable because some Conservatives love it, some hate it. Where do you stand?
I wouldn't say that my view is completely unpredictable at all. I think I've been pretty sound on the policy that I'd like to see us follow. And very early on in the last Parliament in 2010, and subsequently I voted for an EU referendum, and that was something I put my name to before it was our party's policy. And I'm very pleased that it is our party's policy. We're the only party that are offering that. And then where I find myself actually agreeing with Ross on the EU is that it needs reform, and it needs major reform. And that's something that I'm hoping we'll see with the renegotiation that David Cameron said we'll have ahead of an EU referendum. I do think it's I do feel for Ross as well when it comes down to funding of parties and elections, that we have a former Lib Dem Lord who's decided to try and skew the way that this general election with certain candidates might run, and has paid certainly the Labour candidate here in Lincoln £10,000 to ensure that we don't have an EU referendum.
Please be more specific.
Lord Oakeshott
Right.
has decided that he will try and skew politics in this country and ensure that there isn't an EU referendum. Well, I would say I've spent, obviously, getting on for 11 years talking to the people of Lincoln. My constituents would like to have a say on the EU, and they'd like to see an EU referendum. That's one of the reasons why I stood up and voted for it.
Let me give you a hypothetical. If, for instance, there were a government that renegotiates our relationship with the European Union in a way that you found in which it got everything it wanted from those fiendishly clever foreigners, how would you vote in the referendum?
If there's a proper renegotiation that ended up with us seeing it more as a trading entity rather than an EU federalist superstate, then I would find myself actually probably voting to stay a part of that. But as it currently stands, if we had an EU referendum tomorrow, I think I'd vote to leave.
Ross, how about you? A super federalist state?
Like I said, I want reform, but the only way you're going to get reform is by taking the driving seat in that. You can't be part of the organisation and lay down the terms when there's 28 other member states. You do need to lead from the front and get others to follow you. So that would be my view, but I would vote to stay within the EU.
A Europe,
like to see an EU referendum?
a Europe under British hegemony, you're suggesting, are you?
To answer Carl's question, I do want to see a referendum if there's a significant transfer of powers, which is
why Ross didn't receive £10,000 from a Lib Dem Lord Oakeshott.
Which is the Lib Dem policy, and it has been for some time. So when there is significant shift of powers, that's when we need a referendum.
The point is that the noble lord can do whatever he likes with his money, but he can't buy any party's policy, clearly, or else he would have spent it more wisely. An extension of the idea of Europe, of course, the issue here, and it's very much one in an agricultural county like Lincolnshire, is migration. Now, some of the other parties are campaigning, seems to me, more on migration than they are on the institutions and reform of the European Union. The Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives in government together have failed in their target of limiting migration to under 100,000 people a year. Ross, why have you failed?
Well, that was a Conservative target. It wasn't a Liberal Democrat target.
What would be the Liberal Democrat target?
The Liberal Democrats want to introduce a points-based system for migrants outside of the EU. So we have, we can know who's coming in and make sure that we have the skills that we need. Obviously, you need to make sure that we respond to the demands that we need in this country. But just going on to the EU migration, obviously we are part of the EU. We have signed up to the free movement of people, and it doesn't work just people coming over here. We have lots of people from the UK working right across Europe in different economies to help the EU as a whole. So we can't just pick and choose which bits we want. If we try to stop the movement of people from the EU into the UK, obviously there would be consequences coming from that for ourselves and businesses as well.
Carl, the Conservative Party is traditionally a party of free markets, and free markets in labour as much as anything else. That market should be free irrespective of where anybody who's selling their labours happens to have been born.
Well, that's one of the issues that has caused obviously the number of immigrants into this country to have gone to the level it has, is the fact that there's obviously an awful lot of UK nationals who have come back to this country because actually our economy is the one that's thriving in Europe compared to right across the breadth of Europe. The job opportunities aren't there in countries such as Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Places where back in 2010 we were classed along with those as pretty basket case economies. We've done the right thing as a coalition government, actually working with the Lib Dems. We've put policies in place that have ensured that our economy is now thriving, and there's private sector jobs.
Why shouldn't people from southern Europe move to the north to get jobs, just as people from northern England move to the south to get jobs? What's the distinction between those two forms of migration?
Well, there's good migration and there's bad migration, and one of the things I think you have to look at is what type of migrants do we want to have in this country. We have a proud history in the United Kingdom of accepting asylum seekers, and I think that's something that we're all very happy to see continue. But at the same point in time, I think we have to say, do we want people coming to this country who have something to give back to this country rather than coming with their hand out?
Ross, people coming in here with their hands out, is that a phenomenon that you recognise?
I don't think it is. I think the majority of people who come here to work, and they bring a tremendous amount of benefits to this country. The thing that we do need to look at is helping those areas that do have high numbers of migrants to be able to make sure that their infrastructures are in place to cope with the demand from the extra migrants, such as Boston, for example.
I want to just move on to the economy. I suppose that's always the big thing in this election. You have, again, there is a distinction between your policies in that the Conservatives want to pay off the deficit and the debt, thus involving a great deal more austerity. The Lib Dems, your policy is to pay off the deficit but to leave the debt alone for a little longer, isn't it?
I believe so.
Why are we going to be doing this horribly austere thing in order to pay off the debt when it hurts so much, Carl?
Well, it has to be done. Unfortunately, we had 13 years of profligacy under a Labour government, and certainly under the majority of that time, we had Gordon Brown as a Chancellor who not only sold off the family silver, he also borrowed even more money for his pet projects. And that put the country into the parlous state that it's in. One of the reasons that we've had to take the austerity measures is because he didn't save any money while the sun was shining to fix the roof when it was raining. And that's one of the things that we've had to take various rigorous steps to ensure that the country is back on its feet.
One can pay off the deficit, and one understands how expensive it is to have a deficit running long term. But it's not necessary to pay off the debt, is it?
No, well, there's two things there. The deficit is something that, obviously we run a budget each year. Now you have to try and equalise that budget, and that's something I think that George Osborne is doing very credible things to do. But obviously the debt mounts up every year. Now, obviously we want to lessen that as much as possible and as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it's our grandchildren and their children who will be paying back that money, right the way through their lives, which we shouldn't be saddling them with.
We've been running a debt since the late 17th century, though, to pay for our involvement in the War of Spanish Succession, which was no doubt an extremely good cause, but it hasn't really blighted our lives that we've been paying a national debt ever since then.
Well, if you look at what Ken Clarke had done as the Chancellor back in the run-up to the 97 election, it actually got us back on a very sound financial footing in this country. Our pension provision in 1997 was the envy of the world. We only needed Gordon Brown to have been in for 3 years, then suddenly £8 billion being taken away from the pension funding each year, and
Labour Party's not here.
Laughed at, if you like, in the same cases of Italy and Greece's pension provision.
The Labour Party's not here, so there's nobody to defend Gordon Brown, I'm afraid. Ross, is that not a good point? I mean, it's time to pay off the debt so that our grandchildren won't be paying it for us.
Well, obviously we would like to start paying that off, but you've got to make sure that you do it fairly. You've got to make sure that those who can pay do pay. So you're looking at the highest earners paying their fair share. And also making sure that those who don't earn that much, in terms of what we did in the 2010 election, is obviously raise that tax threshold, which I have to say David Cameron at the 2010 debates said wasn't possible. And we have proved that it can be possible. So I hope the Tory party do not take so much credit for that, which they do seem to be doing. But
I think it's only through the policy of the Conservative Party the economy is back on track.
But you said it wasn't possible.
And we then have an economy that can afford to do things like that.
You did say it wasn't possible, and you did promise that before the economy started picking up. So I think that argument's slightly dubious. But obviously we want to raise that to 12,500, so no one on the minimum wage is paying income tax. But you need to tackle those who are on the highest incomes to make sure that they are paying their fair share.
That's very all fine and good, but then you have to define what a fair share is, don't you? It's a slightly vague phrase, everybody pays their fair share. Well, that's not controversial.
Well, no, but you obviously, if you do earn more, you obviously should be expected to pay more towards reducing the deficit.
It seems an extremely good thing, isn't it, that anybody who's on the minimum wage is not paying tax. That seems very sensible, isn't it? It just seems a waste of time to tax people who are in some way being subsidised.
Well, indeed, you have family tax credits under the last Labour government, which was basically employed bureaucrats to
but how's it working under the present Conservative government?
Which seems an absolutely crazy thing to do, and that's, you know, I'm very pleased that we are taking people out of the tax regime. It's what a good Conservatives would always welcome that, I'm sure.
Lincoln is, as well as being the oldest constituency in the House of Commons, it's also become, since 1974, what they call inelegantly a bellwether constituency. Whither Lincoln, thither the country. Are you two going to be happy, the Liberals and Conservatives, that is, happy in a future coalition together? Ross, you start.
Well, that will depend obviously on what's the proposals from the Conservative Party. I'm not prepared to make any comment on that until I've seen the Conservative manifesto.
Carl, how would you think your leader of your party, David Cameron, would enjoy a rose garden moment with, say, Alex Salmond?
I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it's been made pretty clear to the Conservative Party that the Liberal Democrats would love to cosy up to the Labour Party following this general election if that offer was made to them. So we will have to wait and see. I'm obviously fighting to win the general election, not just myself here in Lincoln, but obviously for the party nationally as well, because I'd obviously love to see a majority Conservative government.
And well, you're not going to get a majority perhaps, who are you going to cosy up with if you don't?
We'll have to wait and see what the figures are on May the 8th, but as I said, I'm hopefully going to see a Conservative win here in Lincoln and a Conservative win in the country.
Clearly neither of you gambling men, but gentlemen, thank you both very much for coming along. That's all we have this time for Hot Topic Election Special. I hope you'll join me for the next one. Until then, goodbye.